Please note that you will be able to ask questions at the end of the session using the Q&A function. We'll try our best to answer all questions within our allotted time. Today's webinar will focus on the fundamentals of social selling with LinkedIn and will be presented by Kevin Schmitz, Customer Success Manager at LinkedIn in Chicago. As you know, savvy professionals are making new connections, sourcing vendors, and engaging with prospects online. Unfortunately, if you're not thinking digitally in your sales process, you're probably being left out of important conversations. Today, you'll learn how to get started with social selling and how to understand how LinkedIn Sales Navigator can help you take your routine to the next level. Now, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Kevin to start. There you go, Kevin.
Great. And thanks everybody for giving me the time today. Can you guys, just before I get started and formally introduce myself, can you guys see my screen correctly where it has the fact we all lose deals?
Yep, all is good, Kevin.
Great. And you probably, I just started sharing my screen too. So I'm coming to you guys, Kevin Schmitz at LinkedIn, and thanks so much for the introduction. I'm coming to you guys from Chicago, Illinois this morning. I actually come from a background, if you guys hopped onto LinkedIn right now, my background was always in sales at several different companies. After college, went to San Francisco to get my feet wet, was a business development role, account executive, all through. So hopefully we can relate to some of the things that I'll bring into our discussion today because social selling is unique. It's not the easiest concept to grasp. It's easy to say, tougher to do, tougher to kind of learn about. So that's what we'll cover in this session today. And then bringing you, fast forwarding to today as a customer success manager at LinkedIn, what that really means. I work with hundreds of sales organizations throughout the United States and Canada on really adopting LinkedIn into their culture, into social selling, and being part of that new sales strategy or existing sales strategy. Okay, but here's kind of what we'll walk through today. You know, we all went through this. If you guys are on normal quarters, right, a couple weeks ago, we've probably all lost a deal, right? Whether you're managing a team or an individual contributor that lost your own deal. And here's probably why. Here's some of the three main reasons why we all lose deals, right? We're missing some critical players. I know I went through this all the time, countless times, right? You had your main contact who you thought was, you know, going to sign the dotted line, and then, oh, curveball, there's finance comes in, finance puts a squash on the deal, or you move it forward to the next quarter, right? We've all been there. Or maybe lacking credibility, or losing touch with prospects. I know that's one of the most common ones, right? Where were those touch points? Did you have those throughout the story? So this really narrates, in general, what can happen throughout the sales cycle, right? And that's what spurred Sales Navigator and LinkedIn, because there's so much valuable data on people and buyers within LinkedIn that Sales Navigator really tailors that experience to all of you guys to help get better at these three areas. Okay, but taking a step back for a second on not only LinkedIn and Sales Navigator, but what is social selling? Right, here's a little blurb about it, but I want to bring you guys back to, I guess, 3 years ago before I joined LinkedIn, because I think you'll probably share in this type of experience. You know, if you're like me, you're probably wondering, one, what social selling is all about, and maybe your BS meter is on high alert, right? What is this new age thing coming to me? I've been selling for a long time. I shared the same thoughts. And then best case is you're thinking, I don't know, social selling is maybe about posting and hoping something happens and you get a lucky sale or two. And it probably sounds like a little young, hippie, and fluffy to work for what you guys are trying to go to market with. But maybe it pushed you then to Google, right? You Google social selling and you try and find some things out, but that really complicates it. There's not like a clean answer that you can really find doing your own research. I get it. I totally do, because I came in with this same approach of like kind of challenging some of these things. But what I came to realize is that this is one of the real and most adopted, most well-adopted sales methodologies out there. And that's what brings us here today. So in today's session, our goal is to really tackle why this social selling is a really modern approach to go to market and could be successful with any existing strategy that you guys have today. So what are some social selling behaviors? We're going to dive into this. Here's in simple terms what it is. Creating a professional brand. And we'll walk through this more. Think of that as your website, right? You positioning yourself to the market when you're reaching out to clients, whether it's phone call, email, through social, it doesn't matter. LinkedIn is your landing spot for you as an individual. Just like you guys, if you guys are in a decision-making role and received a call, right? Guess what you did? You probably went to LinkedIn to see who that person, who was that guy that I just talked to, guy or gal. Right? And then the second is finding the right people, engaging with insights, and build strong relationships. I'm going to go through all 4 key components, so I don't want to go too far into here on behind the scenes yet. But keep those 4 in the back of your mind as we go through today's session. Those will kind of be the pillars that we'll go through. And before we do so, before going into those pillars, zoom out for a second for what LinkedIn is all about. So this is LinkedIn on a global scale, 460 million members worldwide. So Sales Navigator, I like to make the analogy of working like Netflix, right, for the sales professional. So Netflix is full of movies and shows, but when you come to Netflix, do you just get a list of the million, or probably thousands, hundreds of thousands of movies and shows and sorted alphabetically and say, have at it? Absolutely not. They tailor that experience. They get to learn you as the individual and recommend the right shows or movies. Similar to Sales Navigator. Tailors the experience for you, recommends the people you should know or want to know, etc. Okay, so how does everybody make sense of a complicated marketplace and really global with all of our businesses? That's where Sales Navigator can play a key role. And so just social selling in general, finding out about these people. And going into it a little further to give you a visual of what this looks like. So say a networking event, right? This is you on the left, and then some of these people that you either know or business acquaintances are in blue, right? So they have their own networks, and guess what you do at a networking event? Who knows who does business with who can introduce you to who, and we all do this every single day, but now we're actually using data behind the scenes for all of these conversations, right? Who knows who can introduce you to who? Or I guess it's whom, if I'm speaking correctly. Okay, so that's where we'll kind of build off of this foundation and the differences between LinkedIn and LinkedIn with Sales Navigator. Here are just some screenshots of what that experience looks like. If you go back and look at the bottom right on that Netflix analogy again, you can really funnel down a complex network of 460 million individuals and filter that down to who you care about. Each one of you guys are going to go to market in a different way. You're going to lead the team in a different way. This allows you to use it in a unique go-to-market strategy. Okay, so back to our pillars though, 4 things. Creating a professional brand. So creating a professional brand is really your landing spot, right? That's your LinkedIn profile when you reach out to customers. And I like this little cartoon of, first impressions are all that you get. I mean, imagine if you were trying to research a restaurant to go to and they didn't have a website or any reviews out there. Like, immediate loss of trust, and you go somewhere else. The same happens, I hear it from countless companies that I work with, is because they didn't have a solid foundation or professional brand, even if they're reaching out from, like I said earlier, phone call or email, people are doing their research. They're coming back to that person, and when you're not out there putting your best foot forward, we fail. And this is what it means in simple terms. So if you guys have separate screens and hop to your LinkedIn profile, you can kind of take a look at some of these these tips that I'll walk through today. So building your professional brand on LinkedIn. First, having a photo. So here's kind of an example that I'll give you on who would you do business with. This is the same person with the same work experience on left and right. You know, if Erica calls you and you come to Erica's profile now and see the left, boy, I'm probably not pursuing. I'm probably a no-show for that meeting. But if she's on the right, looks great. She tells a little summary about her value to the marketplace. She has some links in there to documentation on the company. That's fantastic. I'm in. I'm showing up to that conversation with a little more knowledge on who this person is. Okay, so that's what I mean by having a professional brand. This is putting your best foot forward out to the public, right? Because LinkedIn profiles are public. So I'll give you some quick tips for starting this social selling today. So peer review, if you're looking at it and you're like, oh shoot, Kevin, I didn't even have a profile picture on there. Let's get some other people's eyes on it who've done it well. That's a great starting point. That's what I did when I came into LinkedIn. I had professional eyes all over my profile that really give me feedback. Making sure you have a profile picture and a good headshot, and then sharing content. So what that really means, sharing content, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to come up with all of this yourself. Ask marketing, right, for existing content that you can share via social. It sounds like this webinar right now is being recorded that you guys can share via social platforms. All of this is good and well branded. So number 2, finding the right people. This is one of the more interesting pieces of using LinkedIn, right? Okay, great. I have the professional brand, but that doesn't change all the time. Once it's there, you're set. Your roles change. You can kind of update it on a quarterly basis. But how do I daily integrate some of these activities into my process? That's where we can find the right people. So finding the right people looks like this to me, right? What's an account potential and what's the likelihood to buy? These are my bets for the quarter. Right, and then we make some side bets along the way into this graph that fit into time versus impact, right? And we all do this. We all look at structuring our day, not even in a work environment. We do it in a social environment too. Okay, so how do we get there? That's finding the right people, and quickly and scalably. So that's where LinkedIn as Sales Navigator can play a key component. Again, this is just looking at that complex network of millions and millions of people and funneling it down to who the heck you care about. Whether that's the company size, whether that's the function that your target market works for within those companies, all of these different various factors you guys can have. But one thing that's different than what we've talked about already, think about LinkedIn, and if you guys have ever bought like lead lists or something like that from another company, very stagnant, right? Over time, your sales reps, or if you are an individual contributor, you start to complain, right? This is out of date, this person no longer works here, etc. The advantage of LinkedIn is everything's dynamic each day as people change jobs, as people get promoted, etc. This information will be up to date on a daily basis. So my smartest clients, or my most successful clients, they save some of these filters and they get fed alerts, right? They automate this process. They don't have to work hard for Sales Navigator or LinkedIn. It works for them in the background and really tailors each day on how they structure it. Okay, so some quick takeaways for helping you guys social sell today, finding the right people. First is connecting, right? Remember that graph earlier where we had a small version, this is you and your network, and then we expand it out, right? So start with yourself too, because that can be really who knows who and who can introduce you to who. That expands that reach, and the simple math, the multipliers become that much more, right? Each person that you meet likely knows 100+ other people that they can introduce to. Second is doing your research. So really going beyond, all right, here's the key roles, but what do those key players do? What's their life like? What's their history like? Did they share a university with you? Did they share an article recently on LinkedIn? You can dive into that to really learn the buyer. And then training. So this is more for managers on this call too. So teach new employees your processes. Or if you're just a nice person and want to teach some of your ways and successes, that's the best way to get that knowledge out there of what works, what doesn't. Okay, let's look at the third, selling through relationships. We've talked about this a little bit, but what does that really mean, and how do I find out who knows who? So here's a nice little screenshot for you guys, and this is not a real person, Noah Gold, this is just for marketing, but let's say this is me. Right, so now you're on my profile, Kevin Schmitz, and you want to get introduced to anybody, Sarah Tran here. So on the right-hand side, I'll know what's my best path in, right? Because this will connect not only to who I know, which you guys are all used to on LinkedIn.com, right? We all know it works that way. Who do I know? Now we actually expand that reach and that math again into your team, into your entire team that has a sales navigator license. This is how it works for my companies. So let's say they have 100 sales reps that each have a license. Now we can use all of those 100 networks, and easily Noah here can hop in here and see who knows who. Okay, it looks like my buyer, they both went to Arizona State. I'm going to ask Sarah for an introduction to Noah here. It happens countless times. I actually have a colleague that shared a story, it was probably a year ago today, where they were prospecting into a client and really getting nowhere, but that client saw, or excuse me, my colleague saw that the person sitting right to her right was connected to the buyer she was trying to get in front of. So she said, hey, how do you know so-and-so? It's like, wow, that's really weird that you say that. That's my husband. Right? That's how small of a world it is into really understanding who knows who. Obviously, that conversation, they didn't really mean to not get back to her. It's just people are busy. So if you find an easy path in, it can make all the difference. So quick tips on how to sell through relationships, which you guys all do, but how to do it socially. Leading by example. So encouraging your team to approach it. Really taking a step back if you're in a meeting, right, and do an account overview. I always hop into a meeting and I look at the account and who do the people that work at LinkedIn know within my accounts, right? Because it changes all the time. I have not lost, my decision makers within my companies, if I didn't know other people within those organizations, I would be screwed, right? People get promoted, people leave to other companies, and if you don't know other people, remember some of those stats on like the third slide, we didn't know that there were other buyers, finance came in at the last minute, squashed the deal. That's what we mean by really expanding the reach and leading by example so you can understand the whole scope of the company. Network internally, and then creating a process. Creating a process we'll dive into, I think, more later on too. But what I really mean by creating a process is I know some of you, if you're anything like me, we're probably measured a lot on volume, right? Either call volume, touch point volume, etc. So we're not going to change that. I'm not asking you to do that, right? Over time, maybe, right? We take gradual steps towards adopting some of these calls with purpose, right? If you've joined any webinars lately with some of the thought leaders of sales trainers in this industry, it's all about calling with purpose, right? So how do you do that without, for me, I used to have to hit at least 50 plus calls per day, right? So how do you integrate some of these? Yeah, Kevin, that sounds great, and I think it would be helpful, but I'm worried about hitting my calls, right? So calling with purpose, I think some of these tips that we went through today about knowing who the buyers are, calling the right people, and calling them at the right time makes all the difference, and we can still hit our volumes. I used to do it using this platform. It's not easy. Trust me, it doesn't happen overnight, but creating that new process makes all the difference. So take 15 minutes, not 15, probably takes a few hours. Take a few hours, step back, don't worry about it take one night off, right, where you just step back and look at your process to date instead of just doing the same thing over and over and over, unless you've been very successful with it. But again, even if you're successful today, those that aren't continuing to learn for tomorrow may be obsolete, right? So invest in some of these things. Don't just leave this session and say that sounded nice. Try and do your own research on what works best for you. Okay, so adopting that process. Then lastly, and this is the fourth and really the toughest to do, is engaging with insights. What that really means is engaging, you're the thought leader. Who are you as a person? How do you share some of that knowledge with the public? So if you've been on individuals' profiles, right, and you look at some of their shares or mentioned in the news, let's say like a customer of ours just got acquired a few days ago. So that was big. That was mentioned in the news. That's a type of update. But how do I engage with that type of intelligence, right? How do I reach out at the right time and with the right message? Right? That's what we mean by engaging with insights. This is the hardest to master. So I think this is the one you should put kind of as a future vision goal of engaging with this. But just keep it in your mind as you were going through this. And this is what it really means if we look at how do we approach just the human brain, right? Before challenging, the left side of the brain is really looking at insights, data, and rankings. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to appeal to this person's emotional interests, right? Because something's been mentioned, something has changed, and these are your type of entry points that you can get from LinkedIn, right? What are their personal interests? Where do they go to school? What articles and what recommendations? That's where we see people really master the art of all of this, of reaching out with purpose. So 3 things we can do. Start small. Again, let me hop back for a second. This is the toughest, right? Engaging here. So start small. Just think about liking a simple article that you've read on LinkedIn. That's a great starting point. Come back each day. Be a sponge, starting small. 2, follow some target companies, right? Whether you use Sales Navigator or LinkedIn, you can start to follow some of these companies on who you care about. Set up those alerts, and then look for those openings, right? This is where once we make that vision bet, we start small, we start following some things. Get your feet wet, dip your toe in the water, and reach out with a message. It's going to change. There's not a silver bullet. Just as you guys have learned over time with selling. The same calls that you've made 6 months ago, maybe that strategy doesn't work today, right? We always have to be changing. Look for the openings, play around with what works, what doesn't, and share it with the team. Okay, so that just to recap on the 4 foundational items, and here's quick actions. I know I give 3 for each, but if you didn't write them down, here's the main purpose. Creating a professional brand is all about polishing up your LinkedIn profile, having that picture in there, finding the right people. How do we search over 400 and now it's 460 million members? How do we do that effectively? Think of the Netflix analogy. How do we sell through relationships, right? Well, we can leverage warm introductions. Think about that story I shared about my colleague who sat right next to the wife of the decision maker. Right? That's how we sell through that lens. It's really taking what you guys do at networking events online. And lastly, and the most challenging, is engaging with insights. How do we dip our toe into sharing some of our knowledge out there via any of these social means? Okay, that's really a recap of the content I wanted to go through with all of you today. Really appreciate all of you guys joining. Hopefully it was helpful. I'm going to leave it to Q&A. It sounded like there were a lot of good questions that came through. So we are at the questions time, and it sounds like you guys probably know this better than I, how you use GoToWebinar. So if you haven't been asking the questions, feel free to chat them in, and we'll be addressing those over the next few minutes here. do we have a list of questions that we wanted to go through, Rupalin? You may be on mute.
Can you hear me now, Kevin?
Yep, good.
Okay. So our first question here is, how do I get management buy-in and investment for my social selling initiative? My manager is focused on number of dials, so how do I show that a strong brand and social strategies reduces the need for as many dials as I think that we need to do?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I guess we kind of went into that topic a little bit earlier in investing in this, but my recommendation and what I did too, coming from a similar background, is I made a case, right? Prove out the concept over time. It's not going to be the easiest to start, but when you share 2 or 3 things that you have done to change your process that helped you do, and it was results driven, that's what can change organizations and how they manage by call volume, or whether we're going to lower that. No, not necessarily need to lower that, but purpose driven. So then the company can make the right bets internally on how do we be more purpose driven and what tools can we buy as a company to help my reps be purpose driven.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Kevin. Thank you. So the next question here, a really good one. Are there any companies out there that you think are doing social selling best? Any best practice companies out there?
Good question. I think we at LinkedIn do a fine job of going out there. I've also heard really good stories shared, and hopefully they're on our website so I can share it. I know Salesforce has used this for a little bit, and it sounds like they had some great stories that they've shared, which makes sense, right? They make the CRM, so integrating something like this into their day-to-day really makes sense. So I guess those 2 would come to mind.
Yep, I've seen that as well. Another one here, how much time do you usually spend on social selling, and are there any tools to automate these activities a little more?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I guess social selling, hopefully some of the content that we went through today changed your perception, at least in the slightest way, on social selling. So I think it's just part of your process, right? When companies do it right. It's not a check the box, I shared 2 articles today kind of approach, right? It's social selling is really just a go-to-market strategy, just like if you've ever been through like Sandler training or any other methodology, that's what it is. It's a methodology that's part of your process to help you find the right people, help you put the best foot forward from a professional branding, and help sharing what you guys have with the audience. So I think from a timing perspective, it really varies. Don't think of it as checking the box. Just think of it as part of a process.
Okay, this next question is a really good one, especially as it relates to kind of making a case for management buy-in. What metrics would you recommend people to prove that social selling is effective?
I would say your results that you are measured on. Each person is measured on different types of results, so whether that's meeting scheduled or closed business, go off of the key metrics that your manager cares about. If you're not going off of the metric that your manager cares about, that's just sales 101 that will flop, right? Because that's a selfish take versus thinking of it from the lens of who you're trying to prove that concept out to.
Okay. Are there any best practices that you have for LinkedIn InMails and sending them?
Sure. So InMails, and taking a step back too, for those of you that don't know what an InMail is, you've probably received them in the past. So InMail is a credible message from LinkedIn to another LinkedIn member, right? Similar to an email, but from LinkedIn, okay? So with Sales Navigator, users get a certain amount of InMails per month to use and reach out to members, because a lot of times we don't have what we find. Say you're going after the CEO of a company, you don't necessarily have their email, maybe they don't respond. It gives you a new means of starting that conversation. It can be really valuable. Some of the members that we work with get high response rates, which is great. But to answer your question in regards to InMail of how they tailor it, well, one, they always lead with mobile first. What I mean by mobile first is think about the recipient. The recipient will in all likelihood be reading it from a mobile device, so they keep it short, they keep it sweet, to the point, and ask for something, right? If you're not asking, you're not going to get, so they ask for a meeting, and they keep it to a minimum. I think the recommendation is like 500 characters, but it goes so far, the platform does, as to say, it gives you like a green light, yep, that's good to send, or a red, hey, it became too long. It's a certain amount of characters. It's really neat to see, though, so always thinking mobile first, and then asking for the meeting.
Okay, here's a good one. Do you have any success stories specifically on social selling from recently?
Sure. Plenty. I mean, I've shared one with the colleague who is sitting next to so-and-so. I don't remember which company it was, but I know they did close the deal. Another one that just came up through one of my customers is I actually made an introduction to a colleague of mine that I shared with you guys up front, and I don't know if everybody was on it for the first five minutes or so, but I lived in San Francisco for almost 3 years. So I had plenty of managers out there that are now VPs of new companies, and I think I've made introductions to all of them, and just as of, it's kind of a small world, 2 weeks ago, I think, one of my previous managers bought Sales Navigator, right? They started the conversation because I made an introduction. Now they're working with me, like I'm supporting that client moving forward. So that's just one example that comes to mind. But there's plenty more with our marketing team online if you want to dive deeper into really specific metrics, but that's just from a personal side.
Yeah, that's a great example. Now, I actually don't know the answer to this, but what are the built-in CRM features of Sales Navigator?
Ooh, so there's plenty within CRM. The two biggest, just to be very clear right now, the two biggest investments so far into the two really aligning are within Salesforce, because it's one of the most commonly used, and then Microsoft Dynamics, because we are LinkedIn, as you probably know, is now a Microsoft company. So those are really where the two stand right now, and we've announced a few other, I believe probably four other partners. It would be on our website for full clarity. 4 other partners from the CRM perspective. The goal really, from a vision perspective, is to be the system of engagement. What we mean by system of engagement is you'll have CRM and you'll have social. Where is this middle ground? How do we not have two systems where it's here's black and white and we're having to use two things? Because what we found through talking to a lot of clients is they would have CRM up, right? That's where you're going to prove out all of your things to your manager and where they track. And then once you're placing a call, you'd have LinkedIn up. You'd want to know who you're talking to. You'd want to know about the buyer. But how do we merge the two to be more seamless? And without going into the weeds on what that is, really what we're looking for from a CRM perspective is to create a big overlap so you don't have to be using multiple places. We just want to be where you are, whether that means CRM or email. Lots of features within both of those to give you the tools necessary via social to know who you're talking to in a really effective manner and quick.
Awesome. And then what are some definite personal branding faux pas that you can suggest?
Yeah, I have several. I mean, first, everybody's probably seen some funny pictures out there that are just big fails. This isn't Facebook, guys. It's professional. So those would be the first and most commonly shared to the public. But from my customers that come in with, they've made the investment, the company asked them to do things. One area, and I did this too, this is why it comes to mind, is speaking of your LinkedIn profile as like you, right? So your attainment. I hit 100% of quota. I was trained on this sales methodology and am really an aggressive hunter. Well, what does that say to a buyer? A buyer, do they want to hop on the phone with an aggressive hunter? Like I had a client say that once on his profile. It's like, that's such a turnoff to coming into a conversation with an aggressive hunter. So thinking about those and what the buyer would read from that lens is really how I see successful customers build their professional brand on LinkedIn versus really what a hiring manager would think about.
Thank you, Kevin. I don't see any new questions come through the Q&A function. A lot of people thanking you for answering their questions, so thank you for that excellent Q&A, everybody.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, everybody, those are all really solid questions. Some of them for a first time, the questions. So hopefully the whole session was valuable. Really appreciate the time from everybody.
Absolutely. So on behalf of the CPSA, we want to thank our host, of course, Kevin Schmitz, and the audience for attending today's webinar. Should you have any questions, please feel free to contact salessuccess@cpsa.com. And for those of you who are requesting a video copy of this webinar, please stay tuned. That will be emailed to you shortly. So everyone, thank you so much again. Kevin and Clara from LinkedIn, thank you so much, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, guys. Have a great week.